Okay, we're gonna jump right into our next talk with Ron. Hey, Ron, how's it going?
Fine, how are you?
I'm doing great. Okay, we're gonna give you a quick second introduction. Ron is as you can actually see on his screen, the professor of cognitive science and AI at the University of Sussex, and we're gonna jump into a really cool talk about machine consciousness, taking a little bit of a left turn, but I'm sure everybody thinks about this stuff all the time, so that's a very cool way to jump into stuff. I know that I'm sorry you're like for 2 minutes late on you, but just feel free to take your time and jump in whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was going to say left turn myself. And okay, 10-minute philosophy break, everyone. Machine consciousness. Let me make sure it's working here. Yeah, so very quickly, is machine consciousness here? No. But is machine consciousness impossible? Also no. And I think understanding the middle ground between these two extreme positions of that it's here or that it's impossible can get us a better understanding of what consciousness is and really what possibilities there are for AI beyond what is happening now. And there's our little mascot for the talk, Stokey. He'll be making an appearance a couple times. So Geoffrey Hinton has, let me go back. Geoffrey Hinton, when asked, do you think there's consciousness now in our AI systems, answered, yes, I do. And I have the clip that proves that, but it's not loading right now, so I'm just going to skip past that. So there are people who think that machine consciousness is actually here now. And I think a lot of you are rightly skeptical about that, as I am. But understanding why they're wrong in thinking that is illuminating. So it wouldn't be a philosophy talk if I'd have to give back my philosophy card if I didn't have some arguments and syllogisms to present to you here. So the main syllogism that we're going to consider now is this one. It has two premises and a conclusion. The argument is LLMs understand, for instance, what we say, what they say back to us, the world that we're talking about with them. If something understands, it must be conscious. Therefore, LLMs are conscious. So that's a very simple kind of argument there. Let's look first at the first premise. LLMs understand. Do they really? Well, why do people think they do? Because, for example, this argument, they say some LLMs exhibit the same linguistic behavior as actual understanders, namely people. And so if something exhibits linguistic behavior of an understander, then it understands. That's the second premise. So therefore, LLMs understand. All there is to understanding is behaving like an understander, some people argue. And I think that's why a lot of people think LLMs are understanding. Now, I think each of those premises can be questioned. The first one is that some LLMs exhibit the same linguistic behavior as actual understanders. Well, this is contestable. It might be that for some small window of behavior, they get by with passing the kind of conversational Turing test. But someone might argue that if you let them talk long enough, they eventually all go off the rails in a way that this is important, in a way that no true understander would. We all go off the rails. But these models are going off the rails in a way that reveals them to not have understood all along. That's one way people might object to this idea that LLMs understand. But the problem with this is that, as we all know, LLMs are getting better and better at talking the talk. The window is getting larger and larger. This is, if you're going to resist the view that LLMs understand or are conscious, this is probably not the best way to go. Fortunately, there are deeper objections. There's Stokey again. We can rebut the second syllogism by questioning the second premise, the idea that if you exhibit linguistic behavior that is the behavior of an understander, then you actually understand. We have a long running history of arguments against that view, that just behaviorism isn't true. Just behaving like something that understands isn't necessarily to be an understander. And Emily Bender and her team summarized this in her 2021 paper when they said that LLMs are mere stochastic parrots. They don't generate their answers on the basis of some model of what's actually going on, what they're talking about. Instead, they're just predicting the next token based on token statistics. This is a little deeper of an objection, but it has its own problems. It's a fallacy, I think, to assume that building a statistical map of a language corpus doesn't proceed by implicitly constructing a model of the world that the corpus that generated the corpus. So although you can obviously come up with a statistical map of language without building that world model, in any particular case of an LLM that's doing very well conversationally, you'd have to do hard work to show that it didn't actually construct a deep world model in order to answer those, in order to exhibit that persuasive linguistic behavior. So again, I still think we're stuck. We don't have a good knockdown argument against the idea that LLMs are conscious. Instead, what we might do is go back to the main syllogism and question the second premise. The second premise is the one that said that understanding, if something understands, then it must be conscious. And I think we now have good reason, because of this kind of empirical philosophy that's going on with these AI systems, of questioning that. We now have seen systems that perhaps understand in some sense, but still are not conscious. And to understand how that's a possibility, we have to get a little clear about what consciousness is. And I don't have time in the remaining few minutes to give you a crash course on on consciousness science, but we can make 2 points here. Consciousness isn't an essentially linguistic phenomenon, so it's going to be unlikely that just performing well on linguistic tasks is really capturing the heart of what it is to be conscious. But deeper than that, we can say something positive about consciousness and say it's the having of subjective experience. It's not just answering questions correctly, but it's actually having some experience, subjective experience. What does that mean? Well, by subjective, I mean anchored to a spatiotemporal location and point of view from a perspective. And by experience, I mean something quite complex, but it involves these 4 things. Perception of what happens at, to, and from that point of view. And it's including not just what's presently happening, but also remembering the past and expecting the future. And it's representing not just what actually happens, but what might possibly happen, what could have happened. And specifically, it includes some understanding or a model of how one's own actions affect that experience, affect that impingement upon the here and now. And so that's why I have this little slogan here. I've made it into a t-shirt. Calling ChatGPT a stochastic parrot is actually an insult to parrots, because being a mere stochastic parrot or merely collecting linguistic token statistics and generating the next token based on that is so much less than what a real parrot does. So ChatGPT is doing much less than what a real parrot is doing. A real parrot has this kind of subjective experience I'm talking about. It has a place in the world. It's embodied. It's here and now, and it has an experience based on that. So LLMs, no, not conscious. And they're not going to get more conscious just by giving them more data and scaling them with more parameters. But I'm not talking about, that's a criticism of LLMs, but not of transformers per se. So yes, consciousness is a kind of understanding, but it's an understanding of what is happening or has happened or may happen to this subject in the world, the me that the agent is. And that kind of understanding may be possessed by an AI system, it seems to me, that has a location in and a perspective on the world, for example, a robot, but maybe not necessarily, and it learns a model of that world as experienced, learns what happens when certain things, certain actions are taken or when certain other events occur, what happens to me, to the self. And, transformers are really good at learning models from massive amounts of data. So maybe some type of attention-based system is really going to be crucial for getting an artificial system to have that kind of subjective experience, that kind of understanding of how the world impinges on the self. Now, several other thinkers in their attempts to reject the view that LLMs are conscious, I think, overreact. they conclude that LLMs are not conscious, but they say that's because LLMs are not biological. And sometimes it seems to me that their argument is that the only things that we know to be conscious are biological. LLMs are not biological, therefore LLMs are not conscious. And that's just a fallacy, a straightforward fallacy. And if you, indeed, nothing that I said before about having a perspective and subjective experience and what the computational underpinning of that might be, none of it mentioned biology as being essential. I think all of those conditions could be met by a non-biological system. But what if I'm wrong? Here, I'll just finish with this. What if I'm wrong? What if biology is required? What if biology turns out to be essential for consciousness? Well, even then, even in that worst case, you might say, that does not mean that machine consciousness is an irrelevant fantasy. For one thing, the boundary between the biological and the mechanical is already being blurred. Witness Cortical Labs announcement last week, or was that earlier? Yeah, that was a week, last Thursday. That's just an example of the hybrid computational biological systems that AI is going to be using in the near future, is using now. But also, this is my final point, even if machine consciousness must be biologically implemented to be biologically implemented, that does not change this core insight that consciousness requires a system that can learn and maintain a predictive generative model of its embodied self and its perspectival world. And given that that's true, AI technology can and will be relevant to recreating this, even if ultimately it must be realized in wetware to be truly conscious. So that's all I have for you today. And Stokey says bye.
That was awesome. What a quick, awesome rundown of just so much philosophy so fast. We have one follow-up, and it's a deep follow-up, and you have about 8 seconds to answer it. But if you're in the chat, you can also go deeper. People are chatting. There was a great question and said, you answered this partially. What do you think about the possible future of AI consciousness through embodied consciousness like androids, embedding some additional subjective experience?
Yeah, and they don't have to resemble humans, but yeah, having some kind of body, having some skin in the game, as it were, some location in space-time from which data is acquired and patterns are learned. That's going to be essential to having. I'll just step back one little bit in order to make a concession. I'll say that'll be necessary to have something that we can recognize as consciousness. So maybe there are kinds of consciousness out there that we can't even recognize as consciousness. Oh, well, I can't talk about that. But the kind of thing that we'll be able to recognize as being conscious will have to be like us, an embodied agent located in time and space from which where it's experiencing and acting on the world.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'd love to dig into this further in another session as well. But Ron, thanks so much for coming on.